everyone, welcome to Twilight. This is Pack 365, myself Srija. So today in this session, you're going to learn about physiology of female reproductive system. So what are the functions of this reproductive system? You're going to learn in detail. So the first function is hormonal regulation. So the menstrual cycle, it is controlled by a teamwork of three organs: hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and ovaries. So they communicate using hormones like sending messages back and forth. So this is called as HPO axis, nothing but hypothalamo pituitary ovarian axis. So what does hypothalamus do? So hypothalamus, it acts like a master clock of the menstrual cycle. So what does it secrete? GnRH, which is a gonadotropin releasing hormone. So how does it release GnRH? In pulses, it is on or off pattern. So why is pulsatile release important? Because pulsatile GnRH, it stimulates the FSH and LH hormone. Whereas continuous GnRH, it inhibits the FSH and LH hormone. So that's why continuous GnRH analogs are used clinically to suppress the hormones. For example, in endometriosis. So what does this anterior pituitary do? So whenever the pituitary receives GnRH hormone, it releases both FSH and LH hormone. So FSH is follicle stimulating hormone, in which it helps ovarian follicles to grow. It stimulates the estrogen production. So LH, which is a luteinizing hormone, it is a surge of LH causes the ovulation. So it makes the release of the egg from the ovary. So this LH hormone, it also supports the formation of the corpus luteum. So what does ovaries do? So ovaries respond to FSH and LH by producing estrogen, progesterone, inhibin, and relaxin. So estrogen, it is primarily estradiol. So this is produced by developing follicles. It thickens the endometrium. So in mid-cycle, the high estrogen triggers LH surge. And progesterone, it is produced mainly after the ovulation by the corpus luteum. So this maintains the endometrium for possible pregnancy. So inhibin hormone. So inhibin, it specifically decreases the FSH levels. And next, relaxin hormone, it mainly helps to relax the uterus and pelvic ligaments, especially in the pregnancy. So what is negative feedback concept? So this is an important concept. Like in this feedback, hormones from the ovary control the hypothalamus and pituitary. So estrogen and progesterone are the hormones in which high levels that decreases the GnRH, FSH and LH hormones. So it also prevents the multiple egg release. So what does inhibin do? It specifically reduces the FSH secretion. So this feedback system, it keeps the cycle balanced. And here is a diagram which shows the hypothalamus releasing GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone. So this acts on pituitary gland. And then this pituitary releasing the FSH and LH, they act on ovaries. So ovarian cycle events. So what happens in ovarian cycle? Follicle development, then ovulation takes place and corpus luteum formation, estrogen and progesterone release, and finally fertilization occurs. There will be an implantation in the uterus. So next is uterine changes. So what happens when the uterine changes? There will be a thickening of endometrium. So progesterone maintains it. If there is no pregnancy, then shedding, nothing but menstruation takes place. So this is about the negative feedback. And then positive feedback. So what is positive feedback? It is normally the estrogen gives negative feedback, but during late follicular phase, it gives high sustained estrogen, which causes the positive feedback leading to a big LH surge. So this triggers the ovulation. So this is the most important hormonal event of the cycle. Now what is the ovarian cycle? So ovarian cycle, it describes what happens in the ovaries during the 28-day menstrual cycle. So it has three major events: follicular phase, which prolongs for day 1 to day 14, ovulation phase at the day 14th, and luteal phase, which is the day from 15 to day 18. So coming to follicular phase. So what is follicular phase? This is the first half of the cycle. So what happens in this phase? FSH hormone, it forms from the pituitary. It stimulates several follicles to grow. So out of these, there will be one follicle which becomes dominant, which is called as the Graafian follicle. So this Graafian follicle, this is a growing follicle which produces the estrogen hormone. So what will be the effects of the estrogen hormone? It builds or it proliferates the endometrium, like it prepares the uterus for pregnancy. So cervical mucus, it becomes thin, watery, which helps to sperm travel easily. So what will be the key events in the follicular phase? So estrogen, if estrogen increases, then endometrium becomes thick. So there will be a cervical mucus, it becomes watery. So this is why fertility peaks before the ovulation. And there will be a Graafian follicle which fully matures. So this sets the stage for the ovulation. So next is ovulation, which occurs on the day 14th of the menstrual cycle. So ovulation is nothing but it is a release of the mature egg from the ovary. So this is triggered by LH surge, nothing but a sudden huge increase in the luteinizing hormone. So what happens during the ovulation? The Graafian follicle ruptures, the ovum, it is released into the fallopian tube. So this is the most fertile day of the cycle. And here is a diagram. So the top half of the diagram, it is the ovarian cycle. Like what are the events takes place in the ovary. So this is the primordial follicle. It turns into primary follicle. So which grows into secondary follicle and then mature Graafian follicle. So this Graafian follicle, it produces the estrogen and then it undergoes the ovulation process. So then after ovulation, there will be a corpus luteum formation and corpus albicans if there is no pregnancy. And hormone arrows, these are the hormone arrows. So estrogen produced within the follicular phase, progesterone plus estrogen produced in the luteal phase. So bottom half of the diagram, it is the menstrual or uterine cycle. So the first one is menstrual phase, shedding of the old endometrium. And the second is proliferative phase or pre-ovulative phase. So this occurs on the day 5 to day 14. So this is the phase where estrogen rebuilds the lining. And the 14th day is ovulation phase, where this is a peak fertility stage. And the last is secretory phase, which occurs during the day 15 to day 18. So during the secretory phase, both the progesterone and estrogen are formed. So this progesterone thickens and stabilizes the endometrium. So they prepare for the embryo implantation. So if there is no pregnancy, the hormone drops and then it results in the menstruation where your cycle restarts. So this is about the ovarian cycle and the menstrual cycle diagram. So in luteal phase, what happens? We have discussed this is the second half of the ovarian cycle right after the ovulation. So what happens first? After the egg is released, the ruptured follicle in the ovary changes into a yellow hormone producing structure called as corpus luteum. So what does this corpus luteum secrete? It produces the progesterone, which is the main hormone. It produces the estrogen and also it produces the inhibin. So this inhibin, it suppresses the FSH hormone. So what are the functions of the progesterone hormone? It converts the endometrium into secretory phase. Like before ovulation, estrogen makes the lining thick. After ovulation, the progesterone makes this lining soft, nutrient rich and ready for the implantation. So this is the secretory phase. So this thickens the cervical mucus. This mucus becomes thick and sticky, which prevents the sperm from entering the uterus. So this also protects the early pregnancy if their fertilization occurs. So this progesterone, it also increases the basal body temperature. Like after ovulation, the woman may notice 0.3 to 0.5 degrees Celsius rise in the resting temperature. So this is because the progesterone increases the metabolic rate. If there is no fertilization, what happens? There will be no embryo, right? There will be no HCG hormone. So without pregnancy, the corpus luteum stops receiving the signals. So the progesterone and estrogen levels drop. So hormone levels fall suddenly. So the corpus luteum, it converts into the corpus albicans. So it degenerates into a small scar tissue called as corpus albicans. So this hormone, it drop causes through endometrial shedding called as menstruation. So FSH rises again, which begins a new cycle. So what happens if fertilization does occurs? So HCG, it maintains the corpus luteum. So the early embryo, which is called as trophoblast, it releases the HCG. So the same hormone detected in the pregnancy test. So this HCG, it keeps the corpus luteum alive. So progesterone continues. So this maintains the uterine lining, it prevents the menstruation, it supports the early pregnancy until placenta takes over hormone production, which takes around 10 to 12 weeks. So then the menstrual or uterine cycle. So this menstrual or uterine cycle, the menstrual phase, which prolongs on the day 1 to 5. So this is when the cycle restarts. So what happens in the menstrual phase? The functional layer of the endometrium, which is built in the previous cycle, is shedded away and it comes out as a menstrual bleeding. So this shedding, it occurs because the progesterone has dropped. So the corpus luteum degenerated. So the average blood loss is 30 to 40 milliliter. So the first day of bleeding is the day 1 of the new cycle. And estrogen and progesterone, they are at their lowest levels. So FSH starts rising again to prepare new follicles. And then the second phase is proliferative phase, which occurs on the day 6 to 14. So this phase, it occurs after the menstruation and it is mainly controlled by the estrogen. So what causes this? Developing ovarian follicles, they release the estrogen, which builds up the uterus lining again. So what happens in this phase? Endometrium thickens, that is 3 to 5 millimeter. So new tissue is formed after the menstrual shedding. Next, glands are straight and narrow. So these are early immature glands in the endometrium. Cervical mucus, they become thin and watery, so that this helps to sperm to travel easily, important near ovulation. And it ends with the ovulation finally on the day 14. So due to LH surge triggered by high estrogen, it ends with the ovulation. So next is secretory phase, which is day 15 to 28. So this is a period after ovulation. So you have the menstrual phase, which is day 1 to 5. Next to menstrual phase, there is a proliferative phase in which ovulation takes place. So after ovulation, there is a secretory phase, so which is controlled by progesterone from the corpus luteum. So what happens in this phase? Endometrium becomes thick, vascular and endomatous. So there will be a rich blood supply. It becomes soft and spongy for embryo implantation. And next event is glands become coiled. Like they start secreting nutrients, which is called as glycogen. So this prepares uterus for the pregnancy. And cervical mucus, this becomes sticky and sticky. So it blocks the sperm entry. It also protects any possible early pregnancy. So what if there is no pregnancy occurs? So the corpus luteum degenerates, which drops the hormone levels. So progesterone decreases, estrogen decreases, through which the menstruation begins. So the endometrium starts shedding, where the new cycle begins. So next to menstrual cycle, there is oogenesis. So what is oogenesis? The formation of the ovum. So this explains how the female gamete or the female egg is formed. So before birth, baby girl already has millions of oogonia in her ovaries. So this divide by mitosis and they form the primary oocytes. So these primary oocytes, they stop in the prophase 1 of meiosis, and then a female is born with all her eggs already formed but immature one. So during childhood, what happens? Ovaries are inactive. So there will be no follicle development and primary oocytes remain arrested. Then at puberty, the hormones, what hormones? LH hormone, FSH hormone, they restart the cycle. So in each month, one primary oocyte completes meiosis 1. So this forms a secondary oocyte, where this is the egg released during the ovulation. And then the first polar body, the small cell that dies, discard the extra chromosomes. So during ovulation, the secondary oocyte is released. So this is arrested again in the metaphase 2. It will complete meiosis 2 only if the fertilization occurs. If sperm fertilizes, then the secondary oocyte, which is released, it finishes the meiosis 2. So it forms the ovum plus the second polar body. So egg plus sperm, it forms a zygote. So this is the place where the pregnancy begins. So the follicle development. This is the flowchart of the follicle development and oogenesis. So you have learned this. So what is follicle development? A primordial follicle, it grows into secondary follicle or growing follicle, and then it turns out into a mature follicle or a Graafian follicle. So here this mature follicle, it undergoes ovulation process and it releases a secondary oocyte which forms the corpus luteum layer. So this corpus luteum, it makes progesterone. If there is no pregnancy, this corpus luteum, it is matured again into corpus albicans. So this is how the follicle develops. So next is female sexual response. So what is female sexual response? The female sexual response has four main phases that occur in order. The one is desire, second is excitement or arousal, third one is plateau, fourth is orgasm, and fifth is resolution. So these changes, they are controlled by the hormones and the nervous system. So what is desire? This is the emotional and mental interest in the sexual activity. This is controlled by dopamine, which increases the excitement. Serotonin, this may inhibit or slow the desire. And testosterone, it increases the sexual interest. So desire happens in the brain, not the reproductive organs. So the second phase is excitement. So this is phase where physical changes begin in the body due to vasocongestion. So this is the increased blood flow. So what happens during the excitement phase? The blood flow increases to clitoris, labia and vagina. So this Bartholin glands, which produces lubrication in the vaginal walls become swollen and moist. So the clitoris becomes enlarged because of this increased blood flow. So this phase, it is controlled by the parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest and digest system. So next to excitement, there is a arousal phase or plateau phase. So what happens? This is a continuation of arousal. So but with more intense changes, right? So what happens in this phase? Uterus elevates, like it is called as stenting. So to create space for sperm. So the muscle tone throughout the body increases. So the outer 1/3 part, it is of the vagina, it becomes tighter, and the inner 2/3 of the part of the vagina, it expands in length and both the width. So breathing rate and heart rate rises. So this phase, it prepares the body for orgasm. So what is orgasm? This is the peak of the sexual response. So what happens during the orgasm? The rhythmic contractions of the pelvic muscles and uterus. So there will be a very strong sympathetic nervous system activity. There will be a sudden release of the sexual tension. So there will be an increase in the heart rate, blood pressure, as well as breathing very sharply. So what is important in the orgasm? Females do not ejaculate gametes or eggs. So the secondary oocyte present inside the ovary, it is not released during the orgasm. It is released only during the ovulation. So this is not related to the sexual arousal. So after orgasm, there is a resolution phase. So this is a relaxation or recovery phase. So what happens during the resolution phase? The body returns to the normal state. So the heart rate and the breathing, they slow down. They come to the normal pulse rate. So the muscle tension also decreases. So clitoris and vagina, they return to their resting phase. So unlike males, females may not have a refractory period, meaning they can often experience multiple orgasms. So this is shown in this diagram. So next is fertilization and implantation. So this slide explains about where the fertilization happens, how the sperm enters the egg, how the embryo implants into the uterus, and which hormones support the early pregnancy. So now what is fertilization? Where does this fertilization happen first? It occurs in the ampulla of the fallopian tube, so which is the wide upper part of the tube. So what are the steps of the fertilization? So in the diagram, it shows you the steps of the fertilization. So the first step is sperm reaches the contact with the egg. So sperm swims through the uterus so that it reaches the fallopian tube and reaches the egg. So the first contact happens with the zona pellucida, which is the outer layer of the egg. So this is the egg, right? This is the outer layer of the egg, zona pellucida. So what happens in the step 2? Acrosome reacts with the zona pellucida. So acrosomal reaction begins. So the sperm head, which contains a cap called as the acrosome. So when sperm touches the zona pellucida, the acrosome releases the hydrolytic enzymes. So these enzymes, they break down the protective layers of the egg. And then in the step 3, the sperm moves through the layers. So the acrosome reacts with the perivitelline space. Like this enzymes help the sperm to penetrate the zona pellucida, perivitelline space, and the egg plasma membrane. So the protein receptors which helps to match the correct species sperm to the egg. So this is important to prevent the cross-species fertilization. And then the step 4, fusion of the membranes. So the plasma membrane of the sperm, it fuses the membrane of the egg. So this allows the sperm nucleus to enter the egg. So the 5th step, sperm nucleus enters the egg finally. So the sperm delivers its nucleus DNA and centriole which helps with the first cell division. And the 6th step, which is the last step, cortical reaction takes place. So the egg releases the substances from the cortical granules. So this creates a barrier that prevents the other sperm from entering. So this ensures that only one sperm fertilizes one egg, which prevents the polyspermy. So what happens after sperm entry? The secondary oocyte, it completes the meiosis II division, forming the ovum, the egg nucleus, and the second polar body dies. So then the sperm nucleus plus egg nucleus, they turn out, they form into the diploid condition of the zygote. So this is the first cell of the baby. So soon after fertilization, implantation takes place. So what is implantation? So after fertilization, the zygote begins traveling down the fallopian tube. So where does this implantation occur? It happens in the posterior superior wall of the uterus. So this area is thick, well supplied with blood, best for nourishment of the embryo. So now what is a blastocyst? Blastocyst, it contains outer layer which is called as the trophoblast. It forms the placenta. Whereas inner cell mass, it forms the baby and the cavity is called as blastocele. So now how the implantation happens? So blastocyst, it attaches to the uterine lining which is called as the endometrium. So this trophoblast, the cells, this invade the lining and it forms the early placenta. So the embryo, it becomes embedded in the uterine wall. So what are the hormones which are released in the early and late pregnancy? So in the early pregnancy, HCG, which is a human chorionic gonadotropin hormone, it is released by the fetus which is called as trophoblast. So HCG, it keeps the corpus luteum alive. So this corpus luteum, it produces the progesterone and as well as estrogen. So without HCG, the menstruation would occur. So in the late pregnancy, the placenta takes over the hormone production. So it becomes the main source of the progesterone, estrogen, HPL and other hormones. So this diagram shows what happens from the moment an egg is released during or after the ovulation until the early embryo implants in the uterus. So this whole journey takes about 8 to 9 days. So in the day 0, the ovulation fertilization takes place. So ovulation, the ovary releases a mature egg which is a oocyte. So this egg enters the fallopian tube. And fertilization, it happens in the ampulla of the fallopian tube. This is the ampulla. So once sperm enters the egg, this forms a zygote. This is a new beginning of the life. And on day 1, first cleavage. So first cleavage, what does happen during this day 1? The zygote divides into 2 identical cells. So this cell is called as blastomeres. There will be no increase in the size. The embryo stays the same size, but it adds more cells. So day 2 to 4 cell stage. So what happens? 2 cell stage, the embryo has 2 blastomeres. In the 4 cell stage, the cell division continues, so it becomes 4 cells, still moving slowly through the fallopian tube. And what happens on day 3 to 4? It's a morula stage. It is the 8 cell stage. So around day 3, the embryo reaches the 8 cells, uncompacted morula. Nothing but it looks like a mulberry, which is a solid ball of the cells. You can clearly see this ball. So compacted morula on the day 4, the cells stick tightly together, which results in compaction. So 2 groups begin to form here. So inner cells, they will become the embryo, and in the outer cells, they will become the placenta. So the morula enters the uterus around the day 4. And day 5, this blastocyst, the early blastocyst. Here on the day 5, blastocyst formation takes place. So the fluid fills the embryo, forming a cavity called as blastocele. So this blastocyst has three important parts: trophoblast, the outer layer, inner cell mass, which is a group of cells inside, and as well as the blastocele or blastocele, which is a fluid-filled cavity. So the embryo now hatches soon from the zona pellucida. On the day 6 to 7, late blastocyst and hatching takes place. So zona pellucida, which is a thin protective shell around the embryo. So this prevents the premature implantation, and hatching occurs. So the blastocyst, it breaks out of the zona pellucida. This is required for implantation. So once free, it can attach to the uterine wall. On day 8 to 9, implantation begins. So the blastocyst, they attaches to the endometrium of the uterus. So two layers, they form inside the embryo. So epiblast, which will form the embryo properly, which forms all the tissues of the baby. Whereas hypoblast, it will form the yolk sac lining. So what happens, what changes takes place in the trophoblast? From cytotrophoblast and syncytotrophoblast. This syncytotrophoblast, it invades the endometrium and it starts the placenta formation. So implantation is very crucial for nutrition and further development. So next is physiology of pregnancy. So pregnancy, it causes huge hormonal and physical changes in the mother's body. So these changes helps to support the baby's growth and prepare the mother for delivery. So what are the hormone changes takes place? During pregnancy, several hormones rise sharply. So each hormone has a special job. So HCG hormone, human chorionic gonadotrophin. So this is made by the trophoblast, which is the early placenta. So its main job is to maintain the corpus luteum in early pregnancy. So corpus luteum, it produces the progesterone. It keeps the pregnancy stable. And HCG peaks around 8 to 10 weeks. So then decreases, which as shown in the graph over here on the right side. So progesterone, this relaxes the uterus, which prevents the contractions. So this maintains the pregnancy. It helps the breast development for the milk. And progesterone, it is produced by the corpus luteum in the early phase, later on placenta in the later phase. And estrogen hormone, so this helps the breast growth. So this supports the uterine growth as the baby grows. So it increases the blood flow to uterus and placenta. So HPL, human placental lactogen. So it increases the maternal insulin resistance. It makes more glucose available for the baby. So it also prepares breast for the lactation. Next, last hormone is relaxin. So what does relaxin hormone do? It relaxes the pelvic ligaments and cervix during the pregnancy. It helps the pelvis to widen during the delivery. So these are all the hormonal changes. So now coming to maternal changes. So pregnancy puts extra demand on the mother's body. So these changes ensure enough oxygen and nutrients reaches the baby. So what happens? What is the first maternal change? Blood volume increases. So blood volume, mother's blood volume increases dramatically by 30 to 50%. So needed to supply the growing baby as well as placenta. And cardiac output increases. So heart pumps more blood per minute. So because both mother and baby need oxygen, right? So this may cause faster heart rate. So 10 to 12 beats per minute increase. So GFR increases. Nothing but the kidney function increases. So kidneys filter more blood. It helps to remove waste from the mother and baby. So increased GFR, it increases the urination frequency. And respiratory rate also increases slightly. So mother breathes a little faster, ensures more oxygen for the growing fetus. And progesterone increases the breathing drive as well as the mild breathlessness. So next maternal change is weight gain plus breast enlargement. So weight gain is normal and healthy during pregnancy. So breast enlarged due to estrogen and progesterone preparing for breastfeeding. So here is a graph showing you hormonal changes during pregnancy. So it shows the rise in the HCG, then declination of the HCG, and also it shows the estrogen, which is low at the starting. It rises steadily and highest near the 36 weeks. And it also shows the about progesterone hormone. So this progesterone hormone, it gradually increases from the early pregnancy, through which it stays high till the birth. So these hormones together maintain the pregnancy and they prepare the mother for delivery. So this is the physiology of the pregnancy. So this is about physiology of female reproductive system. So this is for today's session. I hope this session has helped you. So in the next session, you will be able to learn the ICD-10 CM coding guidelines for the diseases of female reproductive system, male reproductive system, and as well as genitourinary system. Thank you.